Boss humiliates. Pregnant. Black employee. Her husband's identity shocks him. What happens when the truth behind a person's identity is so shocking that it turns everything upside down? It was a crisp autumn morning in the heart of the city. Carla Williams sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through an email. Carla, an ambitious and quiet woman, was 5 months pregnant. But her growing belly wasn't the only thing that was making her uneasy. Her boss, Richard Thompson, an arrogant and controlling man with a sharp tongue, had been making her life increasingly difficult. Today, something felt different. The usual hum of office life was replaced with an oppressive silence, as though everyone knew that today would bring something unexpected. As Carla tried to focus on her work, Richard called her into his office with a tone that was cold, yet strangely triumphant. Establish the mystery conflict. Richard had always been dismissive of Carla, belittling her efforts in front of her colleagues, but today was different. He had something to prove, something he'd kept hidden. As Carla walked into his office, a mixture of fear and confusion washed over her. What could he possibly want now? Little did she know, the person she was about to encounter was not the boss she had always feared. His anger was not merely a result of a misplaced comment. There was a deeper, more personal reason behind it. Carla had unknowingly become part of a much bigger game, one that would expose dark secrets, unravel relationships, and bring startling truths into the light. It was a game where everyone, even her own husband, had a role to play. But what secret could her husband James possibly have that could change everything for Richard Thompson? What was about to unfold would shake the foundation of Carla's life in ways she could never have imagined. Carla Williams had always been the quiet achiever in her workplace, a woman of resilience and determination. Raised in a modest neighborhood by a single mother who had struggled to make ends meet, Carla had always known what it meant to fight for everything she had. Her mother, a nurse who worked long hours, had instilled in her the value of hard work, and Carla took those lessons to heart. Despite the challenges, she excelled in school and earned a coveted position at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. However, life was never easy for Carla. She was often the target of subtle discrimination, dismissed by some colleagues because of her gender and race. But Carla was no stranger to adversity. She had learned to keep her head down and work hard, hoping that eventually her efforts would be wrench. Her current situation, however, was weighing heavily on her. Pregnant with her first child, Carla had been struggling with morning sickness, fatigue, and the pressure of keeping up with her demanding job. Organized, the atmosphere in the office had become increasingly tense. Richard Thompson, her boss, had always been cold and dismissive, but lately his behavior had taken a darker turn. He seemed to enjoy putting her down, making subtle comments about her pregnancy and undermining her work in front of her colleagues. Carla had brushed it off at first, focusing on her work and the future she was building with her husband. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. She hadn't realized yet that she was caught in the middle of something much bigger than office politics, something that would change her life forever. Richard Thompson was the kind of man who thrived on control. A self-made man with a sharp mind and an iron will. Richard had clawed his way to the top of the corporate ladder. He was charismatic when he needed to be, but he had a reputation for being ruthless with anyone who got in his way. Born into a wealthy family, Richard had been accustomed to privilege, but he wanted more. He saw people as tools to be used and discarded once they no longer served his purpose. He had no patience for weakness, and this made him particularly difficult to work for. His animosity toward Carla had been growing for months. At first, it was subtle, small remarks, dismissive gestures, but over time, his behavior had escalated. Richard didn't like her. He didn't like her quiet demeanor, or the fact that she seemed content with the life she had built. In Richard's mind, people like Carla were placeholders, temporary, unremarkable. But what Carla didn't know was that Richard's disdain for her was far from the real issue. It wasn't just about her pregnancy or her work. It was about something much more personal. The truth was, Richard had been hiding a deep, dark secret, and Carla was unknowingly about to become a key player in a game he had been setting up for years. A game that would unravel everything. James Williams, Carla's husband, was the opposite of her in many ways. Where Carla was calm and introspective, James was outgoing and charismatic, the kind of person who could light up a room. A former college athlete, James had always been the center of attention. But his charm masked a complex and troubled past. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, James had learned to survive by using his wit and charm. He had a strained relationship with his family, particularly his father, who had been absent for much of his life. This left James with a deep-seated need to prove himself, both to his family and to the world. After meeting Carla, he thought he had found the stability he craved. They'd been married for 3 years, and though their relationship was far from perfect, Carla's calm and nurturing nature helped balance James's wild energy. James had always supported Carla's career, but the pressure of impending fatherhood and his own insecurities had begun to wear on him. He found himself hiding things from Carla. Small things at first, like late nights at work or unexplained absences. But there was one secret that he had been keeping for far too long. One that would come crashing to light at the worst possible moment. It was this secret that would intertwine his fate with Richard's and ultimately tear apart the lives of those he loved. Detective Angela Mitchell was a seasoned investigator, known for her keen instincts and relentless pursuit of justice. With a background in criminology and years of experience solving high-profile cases, Angela had seen it all. Her no-nonsense attitude and sharp intellect made her one of the top detectives in the city. She was accustomed to dealing with dangerous people. But what intrigued her about this case was the complexity of the situation. From the moment she got involved, Angela knew there was more to the story than it appeared on the surface. She could sense the web of lies, secrets, and hidden motives, and she was determined to untangle it all. Angela wasn't new to dealing with corporate corruption or personal vendettas, but this case felt different. There was something about Carla and her connection to Richard that didn't sit right with her. She had seen enough to know that when powerful people were involved, things were rarely as simple as they seemed. Angela's investigation would uncover layers of deception that would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about justice. As the investigation unfolded, the stories of these key characters would intertwine in unexpected ways, revealing the shocking truth behind Richard's hatred for Carla, the dark secrets James had been hiding, and the devastating consequences of their actions. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when the call came in. Detective Angela Mitchell was finishing up her coffee in the break room, the sound of the storm outside barely breaking her concentration as she scrolled through her emails. That was until her phone buzzed. The call was from a local office building in the heart of the business district, specifically from the law firm where Carla Williams worked. Detective Mitchell, the voice on the other end, crackled. "We have a situation. There's been an incident. A woman, Carla Williams. She's been found unconscious in the office, bleeding heavily. We need you down here, immediately." The urgency in the caller's voice made her sit up straighter, every instinct kicking into gear. The crime scene was only a few blocks away, so it didn't take long for her to arrive. When Angela stepped into the sleek modern office building, she was greeted by a chaotic scene. Officers milling about, paramedics wheeling a gurney toward the elevator, and murmurs from stunned employees. The sight of Carla, pale and lifeless, covered in blood on the office floor, was a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the office. The once quiet, professional setting now felt like a crime scene, and Angela's experience told her this was no ordinary case. She was led to the conference room where Carla had been discovered. The room was pristine. Apart from the bloodstains, Carla had been found just before 9 a.m., shortly after the office opened, by a colleague who had arrived early to prepare for a meeting. The colleague, a woman named Lisa Grant, was visibly shaken, but managed to recount the discovery in a trembling voice. I found her like this," Lisa said, her eyes wide with fear. "I thought maybe she fainted, but then I saw all the blood. I tried to wake her up, but she didn't move. I had to call for help." Angela could hear the fear in Lisa's voice, but was already piecing together the puzzle. The blood was a clear sign of a violent altercation, and the lack of a weapon at the scene raised questions. What happened? Was this an assault, a robbery gone wrong, or something more sinister? Angela began her preliminary examination of the scene. The office was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry, and no personal belongings appeared to be missing. It didn't look like a robbery. Yet, Carla had been severely injured, and the blood, now drying on the floor, suggested that the attack had been sudden and brutal. Carla's phone, purse, and a few papers were neatly arranged on her desk, but there was nothing to explain why she had been attacked in the first place. The autopsy would confirm that Carla had been struck over the head with a blunt object. But what bothered Angela was the timing. If the attack had been overnight or the night before, why hadn't anyone heard anything? Why was Carla alone in the office? The company had a policy of keeping offices locked after hours, so it was odd that Carla would have been there early in the morning, with no explanation. Detective Mitchell turned to the first of many interviews. Richard Thompson, Carla's boss, who had been one of the first to be notified about the attack. He arrived at the scene shortly after the police, his face a mask of concern and disbelief. I don't understand," Richard said, his voice shaky but trying to appear in control. "Carla's a good employee. She never gave us any trouble, never caused any issues. Why would someone do this to her?" Richard's story seemed to match the preliminary evidence. He claimed he didn't know why Carla had been in the office early that morning. But there was a catch. He had last seen her at a company event the night before, and they had spoken briefly about a project she was handling. "We didn't talk much," he added. She was with her husband most of the night. She seemed fine. I'm just as shocked as you are. Angela didn't buy it. There was something about Richard's response that didn't sit right with her. His expression was too controlled, almost rehearsed. He wasn't showing the kind of emotional reaction one might expect from someone whose employee had just been violently attacked. Could he be hiding something? As the investigation deepened, conflicting reports began to surface. One of Carla's colleagues, a man named Jason Pierce, reported seeing her leave the office around 7 p.m. the night before, appearing fine and unbothered. However, a security camera on the street corner near the office showed Carla walking away from the building shortly after 8 p.m., but the footage was grainy and unclear. There was a gap in her movements that couldn't be explained. Moreover, several witnesses mentioned seeing a dark car parked outside the office building late in the evening, though no one could identify the driver. Was it possible that someone had been watching her? Had she been followed home? Or was this attack planned from the inside? The inconsistencies in the timeline and the lack of clear evidence were already starting to form a cloud of uncertainty over the case. In the meantime, Carla's husband, James Williams, was informed about the attack, and his reaction was one of sheer disbelief. Angela met with him at the hospital, where he was waiting for news. His distraught demeanor seemed genuine, but there was something about his reaction, something just a little too frantic, that caught Angela's attention. I don't know why anyone would want to hurt her, James said, wringing his hands. We've had our problems, but she didn't deserve this. Carla was a good person. At this stage in the investigation, the pieces weren't adding up. The witnesses' statements didn't align perfectly, and there was no clear motive for the crime. But one thing was certain. Someone close to Carla had to be involved, and Angela was starting to believe that the more she uncovered, the more dangerous this case was becoming. With every new lead, the question loomed larger. Who had done this to Carla Williams, and why? As Detective Angela Mitchell began to sift through the details of the case, each new discovery seemed to add more questions than answers. It wasn't long before the investigation took a turn, revealing unexpected twists and dead ends that sent the team in several different directions, heightening the tension and raising the stakes. The deeper they dug, the more complex the case became. Angela's first lead came from a witness statement, an employee named Frank Dawson, who worked on the same floor as Carla. Frank had been one of the first to arrive at the building that morning, and had seen something strange when he entered the parking garage. I swear, I saw someone lurking near Carla's car last night, Frank had told Angela, his voice filled with apprehension. It was after dark. I was heading to my car, and I saw a figure in the shadows, looking around like they were trying not to be seen. Angela leaned in, intrigued by the possibility. Did you see their face? Can you describe them? Frank shook his head. No, it was too dark. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now I'm wondering if it was the person who did this to her. The mention of a shadowy figure instantly brought a new layer of intrigue to the case. Angela ordered the security footage from the parking garage, hoping to get a glimpse of the mysterious figure. But when they reviewed the footage, there was nothing. The cameras hadn't captured the area where Frank had seen the figure. The footage was mysteriously corrupted in that section, a dead end that left Angela frustrated and suspicious. Was someone tampering with the evidence? Or was it just a coincidence? Adding to the confusion, Detective Mitchell's team began to uncover odd discrepancies in Carla's personal life. During their initial interviews, several colleagues hinted that Carla had been acting strangely in the days leading up to the incident. One employee, Sarah Jennings, recalled a conversation from a few days before the attack. She was upset, Sarah said, but not in a way I'd expect from her. She kept mentioning something about a threat, but she never told me who it was from. She just said she had some things she had to deal with. I didn't push her for details, but it was strange. A threat? Angela's mind raced. Could this have been the catalyst for the attack? Who would want to threaten Carla, and why? But once again, there were no clear answers. No formal complaints, no emails, no voicemails, nothing that could point to a potential enemy. This lead, like so many others, only deepened the mystery. Angela's frustration grew as she continued to comb through Carla's social media accounts, bank statements, and phone records, searching for a clue that might lead to a motive. But again, nothing stood out. Carla's social media was filled with posts about her work, her family, and her friends. Ordinary, unremarkable content. Her financial records showed no signs of a struggle or financial trouble, and her phone records revealed no unusual conversations. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, a breakthrough came when the forensic team discovered something unusual about the bloodstains found at the scene. It wasn't just Carla's blood. They also found traces of an unknown substance mixed in. It wasn't a typical contaminant like dirt or oil. It was a strange residue that didn't match anything they could identify. The forensics team scrambled to analyze it, but the results would take time. Until then, Angela was left to wonder. Was the blood mixture a clue pointing to someone else's involvement, or was it just another red herring? Meanwhile, Angela's team was digging deeper into the timeline of the crime. A breakthrough came when they interviewed Carla's husband, James Williams, once again. He seemed genuinely distraught, but there was something off about his body language. During the interview, he nervously checked his watch and repeatedly asked how long the process would take. "I just want to know who did this to my wife," James said, his voice tinged with impatience. "She didn't deserve this. You have to find the person who did this." At first, Angela dismissed his behavior as simply grief. But as the interview continued, she noticed that James's details about the previous night were inconsistent. He had claimed that he and Carla had spent the evening together at a family gathering. But when Angela pressed him for specifics about the people there and the events of the evening, his answers seemed vague. "I don't remember," James muttered. I just know we were there." Angela's instincts told her something wasn't right. Why couldn't James recall basic details? Was he hiding something? Or had his mind simply been clouded by the shock of the situation? This new layer of suspicion was enough to send Angela and her team back into the investigation, but this time with James as a new focal point. Angela had always trusted her gut, and right now, her gut was telling her something was off. But there was still no concrete evidence to link him to the crime. For now, he remained a person of interest. But the search for a suspect had only just begun. And then, just when the investigation seemed to stall again, a witness came forward with a shocking revelation. A security guard, working the night shift in the building, claimed to have seen a man, James Williams, entering the office building late that night. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, seeing the news of Carla's attack, the security guard remembered the strange sighting. "I didn't think it was anything odd," the guard told Angela. "But now that I know what happened, I wish I'd paid more attention." The man he looked like he was in a hurry, but I didn't think to ask him what he was doing there. I just thought he was another person working late. This was the moment Angela had been waiting for. A concrete lead that could change everything. James had been at the scene, and if the security guard's testimony was accurate, he'd been there when Carla had been attacked. Was this the break they needed? Or was it just another red herring? As Angela and her team worked through the night to follow this lead, the tension was palpable. With each new revelation, it seemed like they were getting closer to uncovering the truth. But at the same time, the layers of deception were thickening. Who could be trusted? And more importantly, who was behind the attack on Carla Williams? As Detective Angela Mitchell stared at the blank screen where the security footage should have been, a chill ran down her spine. The night of Carla's attack was supposed to have been covered by the building's cameras. But all that remained was a black void, as if the surveillance system itself had erased the events of that night. "What the hell happened here?" Angela muttered to herself, slamming her fist on the desk. The team had pulled hours of footage for days prior, but this was something different. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, a message from the forensics team. "Angela, we've got something. It's not much, but it's a start." Her heart skipped. Was this the break they needed? Angela's mind raced. What did they have? What had been hidden in the gaps of the footage? Could someone be tampering with the investigation? And more importantly, what would they find now? With growing urgency, Angela motioned to her team. They needed answers, and fast. But with the security footage gone, would they ever be able to uncover the truth of that night? As Angela prepared to head over to the forensics lab, one question lingered in her mind. Who would go to such lengths to cover their tracks? The interview with James Williams had been unsettling. His story was full of holes, details that didn't add up, moments where he grew too defensive or too nervous. Angela pressed him further. "You said you and Carla were at the family gathering all night. But you can't remember who was there?" Angela asked, her voice calm but firm. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It was a long night. I just don't remember the specifics." But Angela couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "James, why did you lie? What aren't you telling me?" Before he could respond, the door to the interrogation room creaked open. A uniformed officer stepped inside, handing Angela a piece of paper. "Detective, you need to see this. It's from the security guard." Angela unfolded the note, her heart racing as she scanned the words. "I saw him. I saw James at the building that night. He wasn't supposed to be there." James's face paled. He stammered, "No, that's not..." But Angela was already on her way out the door. The security guard had seen James, and now everything about his alibi was in question. But why had he been there? What was he really doing at the scene of the crime? Cliffhanger 3. A new witness comes forward. The investigation had hit a dead end. Angela's team had exhausted every lead, and the pieces of the puzzle didn't seem to fit. That was until a new witness came forward, a woman named Linda Roberts, who lived 2 blocks away from the office building. I wasn't going to say anything, Linda explained, her voice trembling. But then I saw the news about the attack on Carla, and I remembered something. I I saw someone leave the building that night. Angela's breath caught. This could be the key they had been waiting for. What did you see? Angela asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Linda hesitated. It wasn't a man. It was a woman. She was wearing a red coat, and she was walking quickly. I couldn't see her face, but I saw her leave the building around the time of the attack. A woman? Angela's mind raced. Could this new lead change everything? Why hadn't anyone else reported seeing her? And more importantly, why had Linda kept quiet until now? Just as Angela was about to ask more questions, the woman's phone rang and Linda jumped. I have to go. Before Angela could stop her, Linda hurried out of the room, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Who was this woman in the red coat? And what was Linda afraid of? The forensics team had been working tirelessly to identify the unknown residue found at the crime scene. Finally, they had some results, but nothing could have prepared Angela for what she was about to hear. It's not just blood, Dr. Gregory, the lead forensic expert said, his voice filled with urgency. Quote, there's a substance mixed in, something chemical, and it's not from Carla. We believe it's a trace from a specific kind of cleaning agent, one that's only used in a very specific industry. Angela's heart raced. A cleaning agent? She wasn't sure how this fit into the case, but it was the kind of detail that could change everything. Do you know what it is? Angela asked, leaning in closer. We're still running tests, but this substance, there's only one company in the area that uses it regularly. And they've been involved in some criminal investigations before. This was it, the breakthrough they needed. Angela grabbed her coat. The company involved was known for shady business practices. Was this the lead they had been looking for all along? Was the answer to the case hidden in the very substances used to cover it up? As Angela left the lab, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of uncovering something much bigger than a simple attack. The night of Carla's attack had always been shrouded in mystery. Every lead had been a dead end, every witness account seemingly unreliable. Detective Angela Mitchell and her team were nearing the point of exhaustion when, on the morning of the fifth week of the investigation, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the building's maintenance logs. The team had combed through every detail, but somehow the maintenance records had slipped under the radar. Angela sat in the dimly lit office, staring at the page in front of her. The log, dated the night of the crime, detailed the work done by the building's janitorial crew. What caught her attention was the name listed for the person who had signed in that night: Carla's husband, James Williams. Angela's heart skipped a beat. She had long suspected James, but she couldn't ignore the fact that his alibi seemed airtight until now. James had been listed on the maintenance log as an employee on duty at the building, but the problem was the building had never hired him for janitorial work. No one had ever seen him in the building on that shift, and his supposed alibi, the family gathering, was beginning to unravel. Angela's mind raced. Could it be that James had lied to her from the beginning? But why would he cover his tracks this way? What was his connection to the crime? Was he involved, or was he the one being manipulated? Without wasting a moment, Angela called the maintenance supervisor, Brian Thompson, into her office. "Brian," Angela began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of her discovery. "Can you explain why James Williams' name is listed as the janitor on the night of the attack?" Brian's face went pale as he looked at the log. "What are you talking about? James wasn't supposed to be there that night. He's not one of our employees." Angela's stomach dropped. Someone had been covering up the truth. "Are you sure?" Angela pressed. "Is there any chance someone could have forged that signature or tampered with the logs?" Brian hesitated. "There's one other thing. The keys. James had asked for the janitor's key to the building a few days before, claiming he needed to help with some maintenance. But I never gave him permission. I didn't think much of it at the time. He seemed harmless enough." Angela clenched her fists. This was it. The key that could tie James to the crime. He'd had access to the building, and now it seemed he'd been covering up more than just his presence. As Angela connected the dots, something nagged at her. The maintenance log wasn't just a simple oversight. Someone had intentionally covered for James, and that someone had to have been inside the building that night. Could this person have been working with him? Or was James the mastermind who had orchestrated everything alone? With renewed urgency, Angela ordered her team to search through every piece of security footage they had again. This time, with a different perspective. The janitor's key, the maintenance logs. There had to be something they'd missed. Hours later, the answer came, hidden in the blurry footage of the building's security cameras. It wasn't James's face they saw at first. But as the camera panned closer, there, in the background, was a shadowy figure walking down the hallway, dressed in a janitor's uniform. And then, for a split second, the face became visible. It was Linda Roberts, the very woman who had come forward with the information about the woman in the red coat. The one who had been afraid to speak up until now. Angela's pulse quickened. Why had Linda been there? How was she connected to Carla's husband? The twists were piling up, and Angela could barely keep track of them all. Linda was supposed to be a witness, not a suspect. But as Angela pieced the puzzle together, it became clear that Linda's fear wasn't just a result of her witnessing something she shouldn't have. It was fear of being exposed for something she had been involved in. The detective's mind raced as she reviewed Linda's statement again. Linda had mentioned seeing a woman leave the building that night, but she had never mentioned seeing herself in the building. The red coat was the perfect distraction, the perfect cover-up for someone who had been involved all along. Angela's team was now piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle. Linda had been in on it, and she had been helping James cover up the attack. But the question remained, why? At that moment, Angela knew she had only scratched the surface. James was guilty. There was no doubt about that. But Linda's involvement added a layer of complexity to the case. Was she working with him? Or had she been manipulated into helping him? And who else was involved in this web of lies and deceit? The deeper Angela dug, the more tangled the case became. The shocking revelation that Linda was not just a witness, but an accomplice, had turned the investigation upside down. But Angela wasn't finished yet. The truth was close, too close to ignore. And with each new discovery, the stakes grew higher. The race was on. Would Angela be able to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy before it was too late? Or would the tangled web of lies and deceit keep her from reaching the truth? Emotional highs. The revelation of Linda Roberts' involvement hit like a tidal wave. As Angela Mitchell stood in the sterile, dimly lit interview room, the walls seemed to close in around her. She had always suspected that the case was more complicated than it appeared, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional whirlwind that followed. Linda, once a trusted witness, was now an accomplice, a betrayer of trust. The detective's mind was racing, but she forced herself to focus on the next crucial step, confronting Linda. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was heavy with tension as Linda sat, her face pale and drained of color. Her hand shook slightly, a nervous tick betraying her resolve. "Linda," Angela began, her voice quiet but firm. "You've been lying to us. We know you were in the building that night. You've seen the footage. We've talked to the people who saw you. It's time to tell us the truth." Linda's lips trembled as she stared at her hands, unable to meet Angela's gaze. I didn't want to get involved. I thought it would go away. I thought I could just forget about it." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the guilt and fear pouring through her words. Angela leaned forward. "Linda, you don't understand. A woman's life was shattered that night. Carla's family is hurting. And your silence has only made their pain worse. You're not helping anyone by hiding the truth." Linda's tears fell freely now, her face crumpling under the weight of her own guilt. "I never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "James said we had to cover it up. He said if I didn't, they'd both go down, that it was too dangerous to expose. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be part of it, but I didn't want to lose everything." The words hit Angela like a punch to the gut. Linda hadn't just been involved in the crime. She had been coerced, manipulated into becoming part of the conspiracy. It wasn't an excuse, but it added a new layer of emotional complexity to the case. Angela could feel her own emotions welling up. She had always believed in the importance of justice, but this was something different. It was betrayal. It was pain. And it was a reminder that people didn't always act as heroes or villains in real life. Sometimes they were just trying to survive, even if it meant making terrible choices. Across town, Carla's family was going through their own emotional roller coaster. Carla's mother, Janet, had been the quiet, grieving figure throughout most of the investigation. But when Angela finally called her in to share the news, there was a shift in her demeanor, a fragile glimmer of hope that had long been extinguished. "Ms. Mitchell," Janet's voice was soft but steady. "Is it true? Has there been a breakthrough?" Angela could see the trepidation in Janet's eyes. The pain of losing her daughter had never gone away, and each day spent waiting for answers had only made it worse. But this revelation, was it finally the piece of the puzzle that would bring some form of closure? "We believe we've found the people responsible, Janet," Angela said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've uncovered the truth, and your daughter's story is finally being heard." Janet's breath caught, her eyes watering. "So, James, he did it?" she asked, almost in a whisper, as if saying the words aloud would make them too real. Angela nodded. "Yes, James and Linda. They were both involved in the attack on Carla." The grief that Janet had kept locked inside her for so long bubbled to the surface. Her body shook with quiet sobs, and Angela could see the anguish in her eyes, twin emotions of loss and relief. Janet had longed for this day, the day when her daughter's truth would finally be known. But now that it had come, it felt like a bittersweet victory. "I just don't understand." Janet's voice cracked as she tried to process the betrayal. How could someone so close to her do this? "I thought I knew him. He was family. He was—" She trailed off, her hands covering her face as the tears came in full force. Angela reached across the table and gently placed a hand on Janet's. "I'm so sorry, Janet. I wish I could tell you there was an easy explanation, but there isn't. All I can promise you is that justice will be served. Your daughter's death will not be in vain." As Angela spoke those words, she couldn't help but feel the weight of them. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was about bringing some form of peace to a family who had been torn apart by the very people they trusted most. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Linda's confession was nearly complete. She had started with a few shaky details, then allowed herself to spill the truth bit by bit, her emotions unraveling along with the story. She spoke of the manipulation, the threats James had made, and the fear that had driven her to act. It wasn't just guilt, it was terror. Linda had been afraid of the man she once trusted, and now, in the cold light of reality, she was seeing him for what he truly was, a criminal. "I couldn't stop him," Linda sobbed. "I didn't think anyone would believe me. He told me that if I told anyone what I saw, he would hurt my family. He said he was capable of anything. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was doing the right thing by helping him." Angela took a deep breath. She could feel Linda's anguish, but it didn't change the facts. The pain was real, but the consequences were real too. Justice had to prevail. The emotional toll on everyone involved, Linda, the victim's family, the detectives, had reached its peak. Carla's story was no longer one of silence. It was a story of courage, of uncovering buried secrets. And as Angela and Janet shared a quiet moment, both were reminded that the road to justice was never easy. But at least now, they were on the right path. As Angela left the interrogation room, she couldn't shake the image of Janet's face, the woman who had lost so much, but who now held the smallest thread of hope. Justice had been served, but it would never undo the damage done. The emotional scars would remain, for both the victim's family and the perpetrators themselves. The pressure was mounting on every front, and as the investigation reached its zenith, the key players were all faced with their own moral crossroads, each having to make decisions that would ripple through their lives forever. For Detective Angela Mitchell, the toughest decision came when she had to confront Linda Roberts. The evidence was damning, and Linda had already confessed to her involvement in the cover-up. But there was still one question hanging in the air. Would she flip on James? Linda had already shown signs of breaking, but Angela knew the weight of this choice was immense. Would Linda continue to protect James out of fear or loyalty? Or would she finally come clean and fully expose him for the monster he was? "Linda," Angela began softly, "you've admitted your part. But we both know James is the one who orchestrated everything. He manipulated you, used you. Now is your chance to stop this from going any further. What's it going to be?" Linda looked down at her hands, her fingers curling and uncurling in nervous anticipation. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. Angela could see the battle in her eyes, the desire to do the right thing, and the overwhelming fear of retaliation. "I don't know if I can," Linda whispered, voice trembling. "He's dangerous. If I turn on him, he'll come after me. He'll make me regret it." Angela's heart went out to Linda, but she also knew that giving James the chance to escape justice would be a betrayal of everything they had worked for. "You have to choose, Linda. You can save yourself, you can save others from him, or you can stay silent and let this nightmare continue. The truth is the only way forward." Meanwhile, Janet Mitchell, Carla's mother, was struggling with her own decision. The emotional toll of this case had been immense. Her daughter's life had been violently cut short, and now the person responsible was someone she had trusted. She had always believed in justice, but with each new revelation, the lines between right and wrong were becoming increasingly blurred. Sitting across from Angela in her living room, Janet's face was etched with the pain of having to make a decision that would forever change her family. "I don't know if I can face this, Angela," she said, her voice cracking. "How do I live with the fact that James was involved? I thought he was like family." Angela could feel the weight of Janet's grief, but she also knew that the pursuit of justice was the only way to honor Carla's memory. "I know this isn't easy, Janet, but we can't let this be swept under the rug. You fought for the truth, and now we need to see this through. Your daughter deserves it." For both Linda and Janet, the pressure to make the right choice was suffocating. The moral dilemmas were immense: betraying someone they once cared about, facing a future tainted by the truth. But ultimately, both women understood that justice, painful as it might be, was the only decision they could live with. The confrontation with the truth wasn't easy, but it was the only way to move forward. The tension that had gripped the case for months began to fade as the long-awaited resolution unfolded. The truth, once shrouded in mystery, had finally come to light. Linda, under the weight of the evidence and her own conscience, had agreed to testify against James. With her help, the investigators had managed to piece together the full extent of his actions, proving his involvement in Carla's murder. James was arrested, charged with first-degree murder, and the case that had once seemed impossible to solve was now firmly in the hands of the justice system. The public outcry was immediate, with news outlets reporting on the shocking revelation that someone so trusted and loved could be capable of such horror. Linda's testimony was key, and although she had once been complicit, her willingness to face the truth had played a pivotal role in bringing James to justice. The trial was fast-tracked, and as the defense crumbled under the weight of the damning evidence, James was convicted of Carla's murder. The courtroom erupted in a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and disbelief, but justice had been served. The victim's family, though, was left with mixed feelings. Janet Mitchell, Carla's mother, had waited so long to hear the truth, but now that it had been delivered, there was no sense of true peace. Justice, though important, could never fill the hole left by her daughter's death. But with the trial over, there was a small sense of closure. Janet could now begin to rebuild her life, knowing that Carla's killer would never walk free again. For the investigators, this case had taken its toll. Angela Mitchell, once again a hero in the eyes of the public, found that the real victory was the justice that had been served. But even that wasn't without a cost. The personal sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the weight of knowing that every decision they made could alter the course of a life, all of it had led to this moment. Angela knew she would carry the memory of the case with her forever. But it also reinforced her commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. Linda Roberts, after testifying against James, was granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation. While she had turned on her former accomplice, she would still carry the burden of her actions for the rest of her life. The community was torn. Some saw her as a victim in her own right, manipulated by a cruel man, while others felt that her role in the cover-up was unforgivable. Linda vanished from the public eye after the trial, seeking a quiet life away from the media storm. Janet Mitchell, Carla's mother, tried to find some semblance of peace. She attended counseling sessions, surrounded herself with friends and family, and slowly began to rebuild her life. While the trial had brought some justice, the grief of losing her daughter would never truly dissipate. There were still days when she found herself paralyzed by sadness, but she was determined to move forward and make sure Carla's legacy was one of love and compassion rather than death and violence. James, on the other hand, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The finality of his conviction marked the end of a chapter for the Mitchell family. But as he was led away, handcuffed and escorted by guards, there was little satisfaction in his defeat. For all his calculated actions, he would never be able to undo the damage he had done. His story had come to a tragic, inevitable conclusion. As the dust settled and the courtroom doors closed behind them, a lingering question remained. Was justice enough? In the end, the case had been solved, but the emotional scars left behind could never be healed with a conviction. The pain for Janet, the shock for Linda, and the horror of the crime itself were not something that could be swept away with a sentence. It was easy to say that justice had been served, but what of the wounds left on the souls of those who had been touched by the tragedy? Perhaps, as Angela had realized, justice was not the end. It was a step, an important one, but one that had to be followed by healing. Whether that healing came for the Mitchell family or Linda, it was a journey only they could undertake. And so, while the case had reached its resolution, the true aftermath would only begin as each of them faced the scars of their past decisions. As for James, the coldness in his eyes as the verdict was read remained hauntingly fresh. Was there more to his story than what had been uncovered in the trial? Could there be more hidden secrets, more unanswered questions lying beneath the surface? The world would never know, and in the silence that followed, one truth remained. Sometimes, justice isn't as clear-cut as we'd like to believe. As the case came to a close, the answers that had eluded so many for so long finally emerged. But with the resolution of one mystery came the unsettling realization that some questions would never be fully answered. Justice had been served, but the emotional and psychological scars left behind by the crime would linger, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. The story of Carla Mitchell's murder was one of betrayal, loss, and redemption, but it also raised deeper questions about the nature of crime and justice. Was Linda truly a victim? Or was she complicit in the evil that unfolded? Was James simply a monster, or was there something more behind his actions, something that no trial could ever explain? In the end, the case left everyone questioning the true meaning of closure. Can we ever truly heal from the damage caused by others? Or is it a wound that never fully heals, no matter how much time passes? As the Mitchell family moved forward with their lives, they were left to carry the weight of that question, uncertain whether they would ever truly find peace. The story may have concluded, but the implications of the crime would continue to echo in their lives, and perhaps in yours.